Okay, it's been a year since Brian Armstrong's incredibly controversial blog post. Coinbase is a mission-focused company. Today, a year after he did that incredibly bold mission statement that we will not talk about social issues at Coinbase, and he took all the arrows. Well, now he is taking the hornet's nest into the end zone, and he is spiking the ball. Wow. I mean, it is a charged tweet storm. And then Nat Manning from Kettle is with us to talk about how his startup is using machine learning to figure out where the next fires are going to be in California's crazy, insane fire zones in California and all these homes burning. We go deep into extreme weather. We go deep into protecting homes. And should people be allowed to rebuild in a fire zone? You're going to find out on this amazing episode. Stick with us.
This Week in Startups is brought to you by Embroker's Startup Insurance Program helps startups secure the most important types of insurance at a lower cost and with less hassle. Save up to 20% off traditional insurance today at embroker.com/twist. While you're there, get an extra 10% off using offer code TWIST. LinkedIn Marketing. To redeem a $100 LinkedIn ad credit and launch your first campaign, go to linkedin.com/thisweekinstartups. And Zendesk. Qualifying startups can join the Zendesk for Startups program and get 6 free months of Zendesk products. You'll also get access to an exclusive community of startups for advice and connections. Visit zendesk.com/twist today to get started.
Okay, it has been 1 year since Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong wrote his controversial blog post and tweet storm. Coinbase is a mission-focused company. And today he updated what's happened in the year since in a 13-tweet thread. Also, during this time period, Coinbase went public in April and is no longer an $8 billion company. No, it's worth $49 billion. Here's the most important tweets from the thread, which you can read on your own. One, it's a number, starts a thread on Twitter, so I'll include the number. So the first tweet, it's been about a year since my mission-focused blog post. It wasn't easy to go through at that time, but looking back, it turned out to be one of the most positive changes I've made at Coinbase, and I'd recommend it to others. Okay, this is incredibly bold that he's coming out and basically he's not kicking the hive, the beehive right now. He just grabbed the beehive, he ran into the end zone, and he spiked the beehive. And now people had forgotten about this whole controversy. He literally is bringing it back up. Brian Armstrong, say what you will, is fearless and a great leader. And whether you disagree with him or agree with him, fearless is definitely the number one descriptor of what he's doing. Number two, we have a much more aligned company now where we can focus on getting work done toward a mission. And it has allowed us to hire some of the best talent from organizations where employees are fed up with politics, infighting, and distraction. So if you remember, his manifesto was, we're going to work at work. There will be no more discussion at work about political issues. And this was an incredibly challenging thing to do at the time because he did it during Black Lives Matter, and he did it specifically about people talking about police violence, George Floyd, etc. So to decide on social media as a large technology company, and tech companies are hated right now, that he is going to say no more discussion of Black Lives Matter or Israel-Palestine or any issue was really, really, how do I say this? It was, he was kicking the hive, and he got stung a lot. People were very, very, very upset. And this was, people said this would be the death of Coinbase, that they would never be able to get great talent. And my position on this was, for every person who doesn't want to go work there, I think there's going to be 10 who do. Because my perception is, we hear from the people who care very much about political, social, woke, ideological, wealth disparity, Israel, Palestine, whoever's really into those things, those causes, me on human rights. People would say I'm annoying. I mean, many people have told me to stop talking about human rights issues and that I'm annoying and they don't want to hear it from me. But I will keep talking about human rights issues because it's something I'm passionate about. To say you can't talk about these things at work, yes, it gets rid of the vocal people, but for every vocal person on Twitter or social media or, in the press or on TV or in podcasts, I would say there's 20 people who do not want to talk about these issues. Just like if you go to your, I don't know, holiday meal with all of your family and the extended families there, and you got 50 or 75 people in your house, and it's a big giant party. And there's like 5 people who want to talk about politics. And the rest of the people just want to hang out, play softball, drink a couple of beers, and have a good time and gorge themselves on turkey or whatever, you have at your family gatherings. Those 5 people can ruin it for the other 70, right? You've been there. People start talking about, whatever, George Bush versus the Clintons or Trump versus Biden. It just turns into chaos and they ruin it for everybody else. And that's basically what he found. More people now are coming to work at Coinbase because they agree that work is for work and that politics and social issues you should do on your own time. And to Brian's further defense here, he was very clear. Listen, it's not that you can't talk about these things on your own time. It's not that these things aren't important. It's that we want everybody in the company 100% focused on our mission, which is something in the wheelhouse of making people financially literate and independent. And so we can do more good in the world by staying focused on our mission. And there might be other companies with the mission that you're passionate about, whether that's the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Uyghurs in China, Black Lives Matter, wealth disparity. Go work at a company that's focused on that. That's not what this company is focused on. And it's important for every company to be focused on something, just like Rick Warren said in the Purpose-Driven Church. The premise of that book was a church needs to have a purpose. There needs to be one thing that your church is really good at and that you're focused on so that people know what to do when they're there and they have a sense of mission. You'll see that here. We took our Slack and we said the Slack is now for one purpose, organizing meetups for This Week in Startups. And once we said, hey, that's the mission of the Slack, not for marketing your products and services, everybody sort of got aligned. The people who were there to market left and the people who were there to do the meetups became supercharged. So let's continue with the story. It's very important, I think, for every organization to have a clearly defined purpose and not drift from that. Tweet number 3 in the storm. One of the biggest concerns, and this is Brian Armstrong, one of the biggest concerns around our stance was that it would impact our diversity numbers. Since my post, we've grown our headcount about 110%. So that means they doubled, while our diversity numbers have remained the same or even improved on some metrics. So there's a key. People did say no Black people will ever work. No people of color will ever work. Women are not going to work at Coinbase. And obviously that has not been the case, which would be directionally correct if you believe the fact, or if you come to it with the premise that the overwhelming majority of people, 90%, 95%, do not want politics, do not want social issues at work. I think anybody would actually say that. If you talk to 10 people, 9 would say they don't want to have this be a focus at work. But they wouldn't say it on Twitter. So therefore, we're getting a warped perception of the world. And if you're on Twitter, you get a very warped, or any social media, you get a warped perception of the world. On Instagram, you think everybody's thin and looks great with their shirt off in a bikini, whatever, and that everybody's constantly on a global vacation, YOLOing it out. And if you're on Twitter, you think everybody is obsessed with social justice and virtue signaling, and you get the idea. And on Facebook, you think everybody just had 3 babies. It's just, each of those social networks has a certain leaning, and Twitter can give you a deranged view of the world. Number 5, what was amazing was the contrast between the news following my post and the reaction from employees and people who spoke to me in private. While the media reports were mostly negative and it even spawned some retaliatory and intellectually dishonest hit pieces, the reaction from both employees and people I spoke to in private was overwhelmingly positive. Yeah, that's directionally correct. I think people are scared to talk about this in public. On episode, I think 9 of All In, we talked about this issue, and I talked about it here on the podcast. And I think uniformly, we were in favor of this. Sachs, Friedberg, and myself, and even Chamath, who is a person of color, he didn't think that the blog post was written very well. It was a little bit rambling, which it was long. He thought they should look at everything through the lens of their mission, and he could have said it more deftly. And Sachs and Friedberg thought, yeah, in their experience, people don't want to come to work to talk about politics. They want to do that on their own time. And my position was at the time, and still remains, a lot of this is exacerbated because people aren't actually talking to each other. They're chatting with each other. If you're chatting, there's no empathy. You're doing this in a Slack room. It takes over the entire organization, more so during a pandemic because everybody lives in Slack. Your company manifests itself in Slack as opposed to a real world location. What's going to happen? All of a sudden, you see 78 messages in the random folder. Everybody rushes over there. Oh, why? There's 78 messages. Oh, and it's 7 people out of 700 fighting about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or Uyghurs in China or Black Lives Matter or police violence. And then people are like, hey, maybe his point of view is good, or, oh, hey, I kind of love this. And then it just takes over. And now the entire company, instead of working on the mission, is spending 90% of their emotional energy and 20% of their actual time in those rooms. And it is exhausting. You ever been in a Twitter feed or an iMessage thread when people are going at it about politics or religion or abortion or gun control? It might only take, 30 minutes of your day to deal with that. But it might emotionally and spiritually and energy-wise take half of your energy from the day. And it could put people in a mood where they want to quit the company or they feel hurt. And you know how it is when you feel hurt or when you feel misunderstood or you feel attacked. You ever have that where you feel attacked or misunderstood and, for 2 or 3 days you're thinking about it? Now put that on the entire company. You're basically making the entire company feel those feelings. If you don't have business insurance, you failed one of the first steps in being a great entrepreneur. Startups should look no further than Embroker, E-M-B-R-O-K-E-R. Embroker's technology saves you time and money. Prices are up to 20% lower, and you're going to get better coverage than incumbents, and you go from sign up to quote and purchase in just 10 minutes. When you work with Embroker, instead of business insurance incumbents, you're not dealing with these large, slow corporations, and the sign up takes just days, not weeks. The process is completely transparent. There is no opaque pricing. And I'm going to quickly explain 2 crucial types of insurance you need. Cyber insurance. What does it cover? It covers hacks. They happen all the time. And you need to have coverage for that. Plus, D&O insurance. This is for your directors, people on your board, and officers, the top 5 or 6 people of the company. If somebody does something dumb and you get sued, you need to protect the directors and officers because they're responsible. And even if you don't do something dumb and somebody still wants to sue you, because people can sue you for any reason. They could be wrong, you could be right. It doesn't matter. You need to have the insurance online so you can protect yourself. So, to instantly buy custom-built insurance for startups, go to embroker.com/twist. EMBROKER.com/twist. And while you're there, get an extra 10% off by using the offer code TWIST. Okay, let's get back to this amazing program. 7, back to Brian Armstrong's tweet. In fact, I would say it was probably the most positive reaction I've gotten for any change I've made in the history of the company, which is saying something. How could something be so negative in the press or turn out to be so incredibly positive with every other stakeholder? I can answer that for you. The press is broken up into 4 buckets. I'll explain that in a moment. But essentially, one of those buckets is, 2 of those buckets are particularly enamored with any kind of a fight because it drives page views, it drives likes, and it drives subscribers. So I can tell you, the reason why it's so positive inside your company and the press is so negative is because not all the press is using your story, Brian, in order to get page views. The 2 buckets that are the content farming group. So content farming group would probably be a large portion of BuzzFeed, but not all, because they have also some really great investigative journalists. But, the folks who are just trying to, Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, doing link baiting stuff, they're going to do content farming on this story and spin it whatever their spin will be determined by what will get them the most clicks. And they actually test this by using Facebook, and they'll test 5 different headlines for the story. Whichever one gets the most clicks, gets the most reaction, gets the headline. And they'll do that, and they have separate writers to write the headlines who are good at writing controversial headlines. They get you to click. Those content optimizing folks do not care about the truth. They care about the clicks. Obviously, if it's controversial, they don't care if it's the truth. They care if it gets clicks. That's one bucket. The next bucket is the virtue signaling press, or the agenda-driven press, the advocacy-driven press. And advocacy press has always existed, but it's very much in fashion now. And it is becoming a larger and larger percentage of writers. So if you look at the New York Times, they're hiring writers specifically who are anti-tech and who want to hold tech accountable. Literally, the New York Times has predetermined that tech is guilty and is making hiring decisions based on who is the most anti-tech. Let that sink in. The New York Times, the paper of record, is hiring the most anti-tech journalists they can find. And they're explicitly saying, we're hiring journalists because they have a proven track record in being anti-tech and holding tech accountable, and we need to do that. The most cynical view of that would be the Balaji take, which is they see technology companies as their adversary, like Facebook and Google are taking all their money and their attention, and therefore they are attacking them and using their journalistic firepower to attack. And that feels pretty smarmy, but I don't think that's exactly accurate. So the other two pieces of the press and buckets would be the direct to consume, the subjects going direct, like myself and All In, and, CEOs who have big followings on Twitter, or Andreessen Horowitz, failed content attempts that they copied from my playbook and they just did poorly and they don't get any attention for. And then finally, there's the old school press, Kara Swisher, Cade Metz, just the old school press who just want to tell the stories as accurately as they can. And remember, I interviewed Cade on episode 1187, and his talk was he talked with me about that Slate Star Codex article. I asked him who wrote the headline and for the article Silicon Valley Safe Space, and he was, he kind of indicated that he did it in collaboration. He didn't want to throw the person under the bus, but you could kind of infer that he would have preferred he wrote it, but basically it was an editor. And, the headline really didn't match his article, which then leads to this whole sort of feeling of animosity between the tech world and press. And listen, tech has, because of Facebook and other bad behavior, tech does need to be held accountable. And we've seen great moments in investigative journalism about tech companies, whether it's John Carreyrou, old school journalists with Theranos, or the Wall Street Journal with the Facebook paper. So you can't paint the press with one brush. It really is four specific buckets. And there's the content bucket, just content optimization. They're ruthless, horrible people who just want to get clicks. They don't care about the truth. Then you have the advocacy, which, say what you will about them, but they are advocating for their position. Some of them are explicit about it, like Fox News and MSNBC. Other ones are kind of not as explicit about it, like the New York Times, who are kind of saying that they're the paper of record while they've picked a side, basically. And consumers are hashing that out. So anyway, enough on that. Let's keep going back to Brian's tweet storm. 9, the biggest lesson I took away from the whole ordeal is that if you believe something is the right path, it's worth speaking about, even if it's controversial. My take on this is, number one, people should be allowed to talk about whatever they want. They should have whatever positions they want. And the founders of a company should decide if they want to have a company that embraces that debate or having debates at all, or the founders of the company can decide they want to have no debates. In my small company, I love having debates. I can handle it. It's never gotten out of control. I am a strong presence within the company. I've hired and had I think I've done a great job building the specific culture that I want. And if people don't fit into that culture, they're not going to stay here. Now, these are under 20 person companies, Inside.com and Launch. So it's a lot easier for me to do that. Once a company gets big, you start to lose that ability for me to have a personal touch with each employee, each team member. So I think that this is going to be the future of companies. And if you want to work at a company that has a specific mission, pick that. If the New York Times position is tech is bad or largely bad, and we need to hold them accountable, well, they're great. Then people who want to take that position go there. If other journalists want to say, I'm going to try to find the truth and I'm not going to come to it with a predetermined position, then I will go work for The Economist or Financial Times or, whatever other publication is trying to, just be objective, right? So you can pick where you want to go. If you're an advocate, you can go work for MSNBC or Fox or Jacobin. Is that how you pronounce it? Jacobin? Anyway, I love listening to Jacobin, writers. I love Motherboard and Vice writers. I love to understand their positions. I don't agree with them. But I love that those publications exist and I can take then there's like the kids from, Jacobin and whatnot do like This Machine Kills. I listen to that podcast and they pick good stories. I mean, they're completely uninformed in their positions because they're so anti-tech or so anti-capitalism that they have this crazy blind spot. But I like hearing their wacky positions because They do alert you to how some people think about the world, and that's good. I like to be more informed. And they pick good topics, right? They find things that are on the margins really interesting. In fact, the way I was alerted to the Amazon driver controversy was Jacobin, whatever the socialist magazine is, and This Machine Kills, they alerted me to this article about drivers being upset about being under cameras to watch their driving ability. And, so kudos on, really finding the edge cases or the bubbling up stories. Does any public company have a more dynamic founder with the authority than Coinbase's does right now is a question that has come up here in my notes from our audience. And so, I would say, Tesla, Brian Armstrong, maybe Jack at Twitter and Square. I'm trying to think of iconoclastic leaders who do not care about what other people think about them and are brave. Benioff, Michael Dell. Jeff Lawson is from Twilio is pretty outspoken too. Yeah. And he takes the other side of this, right? So, they're out there. It's kind of hard to be very, candid when you're a public company because you're responsible for the share price and the shareholders and the stakeholders. So you don't want to be too cavalier, but I think Brian has absolutely walked the line here. And I think this is part of the, reaction to perhaps the hysterical or extreme culture we've been in, whether it's the Trump trolling or the hysterical left and socialists. I think the world is rejecting those two groups of people and saying, let's get back to some more moderate way to have discourse. And I'm very proud of All In because I feel like being the creator of that podcast and bringing all those guys together has been my way of saying, hey, let's see if we could have a reasonable discussion. And it's why on that podcast, you don't hear me giving my takes that much. I consider myself the point guard or the conductor of a great conversation. So I've been really trying to, develop a new muscle for myself, which is, can I be the greatest moderator of hard conversations and keep the conversations moving, keep the conversations fun, get a couple of laughs in, and then maybe ask basic questions on behalf of the audience. So some people are like, Jay Kyle is really stupid. He's asking stupid questions on All In. And I'm like, when I ask a question that's very basic to a bestie, do you think it's because I don't know the answer? Really? Or do you think I might be asking that very basic question for the benefit of the guest or the bestie and the audience? So when I ask something very basic, like I asked Balaji, like, well, when you say that the blockchain is better for truth and it's immutable and that's the strength, what if somebody puts your social security number on it or a lie? How is that mitigated? Now, I know the answers. I've researched that. I've discussed it 100 times with very qualified people in the truth business and fact-checking business and also in crypto. I'm asking that question to start a dialogue. So for people who are not understanding why I ask very basic questions on this podcast or the other, it's called the job of the moderator, the interviewer. So hats off to Brian Armstrong. I think he has set the new standard. I think every company is going to take this position. Even the woke companies are going to start taking this position, which is going to be, if you want to talk about it with your employees, do it on your time. Here's the mission of the company. Stay focused on the mission. And I think they're going to take my advice, which is delete the random channel on your Slack immediately. It should not be there by default in a business setting. It only gives people this outlet and pressure cooker to put stuff that's going to cause suffering down the line and misunderstanding. No political discourse, no social discourse on the Slack channels. If you want to do that, do it in person. Do it on a Zoom call and you'll get a much different result. All right. That's my take. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you have comments, come to thisweekinstartups.com/Slack and you can talk about it in our Slack channel. Or you can interact with us on Twitter. All right, question that came in. If you're a retail investor and you see an iconoclastic, outspoken, very mission-driven founder like Brian Armstrong, does that make you more likely to buy the stock or less likely? Of course, it makes you more likely. Unless their position is absolutely deranged and sociopathic, which I'm trying to think of an example here, maybe Nikola or one of those companies where you have like a certain amount of confidence that is unearned. Sure. Yeah, that might be a sell signal, but I think uniformly founder authority in a publicly traded company is magical. I don't think that, Tesla as an example could have done something like the Cybertruck if Elon wasn't the CEO. You can only make a bold choice like that if you're the founder. I think Apple can't make bold choices anymore because Steve Jobs isn't there to say, you know what, we're doing this. We're going to build a car, or you know what, we're going to buy this company. The founder authority is absolutely critical for bold decisions. The reason why Facebook was able to buy WhatsApp and Instagram was because Zuckerberg had control of that board. He had all the voting power. He informed the board he was doing it. That's how the story goes on those two acquisitions. Any other company that was going to acquire those companies would have had a dialogue and research and consultants, debate it with, Jack and Evan and whatever DeCostello were going to buy Instagram as an example, at Twitter. The reason they weren't able to buy it was because they had to have a discussion about it, and Zuck just took Kevin Systrom for a walk, explained why this was a great idea, and put the number down. And the same thing with WhatsApp founders. So you do want to look for founder authority. You do want to look for bold, empowered founders with a point of view. So, that's my answer to your question. Before we get into the ad, I just want you to go to linkedin.com/twist right now, linkedin.com/twist, and post your first job for free. What a deal. Incredibly supportive of you, LinkedIn, to give that free job to our listeners. And small business owners are busier than ever. The time spent searching for and interviewing wrong candidates, let's face it, bad candidates, takes away from growing your business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has made it easier to get the candidates worth interviewing faster. And they're giving you your first job for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach the world's largest professional network of over 770 million people. Use screening questions to get your role in front of only the most qualified people. Then quickly filter and prioritize who you want to interview and eventually hire. We love LinkedIn Jobs at launch and inside. And in 2021, we've hired a third producer, a curriculum designer, and a few more researchers, and we're doing all that hiring on LinkedIn. We love it, and we're still hiring. So here is your call to action one more time. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right candidates worth interviewing faster. Every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn, so post your job for free, free, F-R-E-E, at linkedin.com/twist. That's right, linkedin.com/twist to post your first job for free. Terms and conditions do apply because they're giving you something for free. All right, let's get back to this amazing episode. Okay, everybody, we all know that severe weather conditions, global warming, whichever you prefer, and we'll keep this from getting too political, is wreaking havoc on the world. And having homes insured is becoming a key vector in dealing with extreme weather. We have people who are buying houses all over Tahoe. They had a huge boom during the COVID, and sadly, the wildfires here in Northern California started up again, creating absolute chaos. We have people in Louisiana and Florida dealing with floods, and there must be ways to insure these products and keep people safe at the same time, while really dealing with this issue in a big picture, which means probably fire materials, fire retardant materials in buildings, building houses on stilts, all kinds of new building materials, and of course, addressing climate change by sequestering carbon, building more nuclear reactors, working on the Hail Mary of fusion reactors, which is getting there. Could be in the next decade or two, we stop talking about energy as an issue and start moving on to the next issue. With me today to discuss his startup, Kettle, which is a reinsurance company that uses data and models to create better priced policies for forest fires specifically, is Nat Manning. Welcome to the program, Nat.
Thanks for having me.
Nat, how many people are living in fire zones today? How many homes are at risk every year here in America?
So there are two ways to go about this. So there are about 14 million structures in California.
Okay.
Last year was the third worst year in history for fires in 2020. And about 4 million acres burned down out of about 100 million across the state. So about 4%.
4%
of the state.
Of the forest land in our state, not the state's total land mass, but the forest of the state.
Actually, no, the whole state is about 100 and change. So about 4% of the total acres of the state burned down. But there's more to this. So it seems like it is a big number, right?
That is no, wait a second. That seems like a ginormous number.
Mhm.
What was it 20 years ago? What would we typically see in a fire season?
Okay, so that's the right question. So there are
Yeah.
two answers to that. So 20 years ago, we're looking at a couple percent, less than 1%. But 100 years ago, 100 years ago, through kind of prehistoric ages, that number was actually like 7 to 10. And so we, showed up in culture as humans, and we started building everywhere. And we said, hey, we're going to suppress these fires. I don't want them to burn things down. It makes sense, right?
Right.
A lot of different stuff goes into this, but essentially, it is very healthy for fires to burn. But the difference is now you've got these huge fires that are going everywhere and are getting totally out of control. Whereas before, that 7 to 11% is actually many, many, many smaller fires burning smaller amounts and then going out, and they don't get that dangerous and they don't get that destructive. And so while the number was bigger, the type of fire and the destruction of that fire was different.
So that's worth pausing on for a second. You have a quantity and a qualitative change occurring at the same time, which, as a man of statistics, I'm assuming running an insurance company and trying to assess risk, it's very hard to have a discussion with this in a very politicized environment, because you could pick different statistics here. The 7 to 10% statistic, the 1% or less statistic from 20 years ago, and the 4% now, and play all kinds of games with that.
That's right.
But what is even harder to have a reasonable conversation about is that qualitatively, what you're saying is the fires today are much more intense, localized, and bigger, as opposed to spread out in little pockets.
That's right.
Am I accurate in understanding your assessment of the situation?
That's exactly right. So, give you a couple other numbers to put that in context, right? Like back to 100 plus years ago, we didn't have humans running around putting out fires. So there's actually about 10,000 fires a year in California. 14 of them last year caused 99% of the damage. So we actually put most of the fires out, right?
Got it.
And then what happens is you have 1 to 10 that get totally out of control and create these mega fire situations. Whereas before, a large portion of those 10,000 would kind of burn and then burn themselves out and naturally stop because they'd hit a stream. The forests, were better managed by
maybe the wind died down. I mean, it does seem like wind is. Am I correct as a neophyte in this area that these high winds seem to determine the intensity of these?
They're a huge factor. Yeah, they're a huge factor. And then the other one, there are two parts to this. There's the reality. You can't deny that there's less rain than there used to be. The season's longer and it's hotter than it used to be.
Okay.
We don't need to get into why that is and argue about it. It's just true.
Yes.
And
the fact is it's hotter.
Yes.
And it's drier. And if it's hotter and drier, that creates more kindling.
Exactly. Creates fuel.
Which is fuel. And from my Boy Scout days, we learned pretty clearly the smaller these fibers, the smaller the twigs. You would start with small, dry things and then build up to bigger logs. It's not that we have bigger logs everywhere. It's that we got a bunch of this small debris everywhere, which is just absolutely perfect for starting these fires up. So we're basically creating massive, massive amounts of kindling, which led to this cavalier statement by one of our former elected officials that we need to rake things up more like Norway or other places, which seemed cavalier and silly, but also seemed to ring true that keeping some of this kindling and cleaning up, the underbelly, the ground under trees would help, because we know that is factually correct. Is it factually correct that if we swept up, I mean, it's a stupid way to say it, but if there was more what do you call the act of taking the kindling out or or raking up? Is there a term in the industry for that? And is that actually a viable thing?
It is. It's called forest thinning.
Thinning,
And then
got
the
it.
other thing is controlled burns.
Got it.
And that's exactly right. I mean, so look, like the weather, that's one factor of it. There are things we could have and hopefully possibly could have done decades ago or will continue to do now. You mentioned, energy and fusion, like these things long term will help, change and these weather patterns and hopefully kind of bring some stasis back. That's going to take a while. And in the meantime, you've got forest management and you've got what do you do with the fuel that's there today? And what you can do is forest thinning and controlled burns, which are both proven methods. It just takes the long and short is we should put a lot of people to work doing that, and it would help.
In California, how many people would we need to thin the forests to take the 4% of the state being on fire to say 2%? Or is it even possible through thinning and control burns to do that? I'm not looking for a specific number of people, but like if we had a ballpark, are we talking about thousands of people full-time, tens of thousands?
I think it's tens of thousands. But I have seen some analysis from a numbers point of view. So I saw 10 billion as a number that we should start spending annually to do this. The other thing to know, though, so there's part of this is it's California's responsibility. 60% of the land in California is owned by the federal government.
Wow.
So the other problem is that you've got land and forests that are owned by local communities. You got land and forest that's owned by the state, and you got land and forest that's owned by the federal government. And all of those require different political actions.
The federal government is also very busy, I would say. So if the federal government is busy and they own land here, they're kind of like an out-of-state resident that turns over every 4 to 8 years. They're not on the ground. Would this not be an interesting moment to think, and listen, I'm a capitalist who thinks about economics, and you are as well. Would it not be time to rethink their ownership of that land and stewardship of it and say, hey, maybe the federal government can own it, but we're going to give a 100-year lease on this section of it to the federal government and say, hey, this should be developed in some way that creates revenue that would then result in this being cleared. So if we created a park or we rented out part of it or we developed part of it with homes, I know people are anti-development in the state, generally speaking, but if there was some way to create a revenue stream for that plot of land, whether it was through tourism or homes or something, it could even be bike trails, whatever. There's some way to create revenue stream, create some revenue from it, have the local folks manage it. Then there would be some ownership. Therefore, somebody would actually be responsible for doing the thinning, and it would be an expense on their P&L.
That's certainly, it's certainly possible. And one of the answers to that was, the national park solution in California. Like, go back, like that's what Yosemite is, right? Like it's a revenue generating, amazing resource that is federally owned.
Zendesk is the go-to tool for customer support. We all know that. They also offer a suite of tools designed to remove the difficulties of sales software. So get Zendesk's suite of sales tools plus their industry-leading support software for free for 6 months as part of Zendesk for Startups. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. But I want you to know that you'll also get access to Zendesk's community of startup founders and partners, and they'll even offer dedicated onboarding guidance and support. You know Steezy Studios, it's one of our portfolio companies, and they sell software to learn how to dance. Hundreds of thousands of people are using that software, and they want to make sure everybody has a great experience with the software, obviously. So, through a combination of Zendesk Explorer and their ticket tagging system, Steezy is able to track which features their users are most excited about and then relay that to the product team. So they're using customer support to make the product better. So for Steezy, Zendesk creates a positive relationship with their members and empowers them to contribute to Steezy's growth in return for some awesome dance moves. Get 6 months of Zendesk for Startups free at zendesk.com/twist. To qualify, you must have under 50 employees. That's reasonable. And you must have raised a Series A or below and be a new Zendesk customer. A couple conditions there because they're giving you something really valuable for free. 6 months of Zendesk for Startups. Start building the best customer experiences at Zendesk.com/twist. Yosemite must be massively profitable because you can't get a tent there.
You can't get in, right?
You can't get in. So they're sold out and they could just keep raising the rates. So why not make Yosemite, why not add 5 Yosemites, make the prices even more expensive, and then use it to then. And then, of course, you can give people, lower price things to make sure everybody can use it. But you could make some premium products there to drive revenue streams. Because it seems to me that there is a who's going to pay for it kind of moment going on here and finger pointing. Is that correct as well?
That is, but I'm going to transition this way. So one of the other solutions, so government for sure. But the other one, and one of the reasons why I love insurance is that the incentives all become aligned, right? Mm-hmm. So if I run an insurance company that's, just writing insurance against wildfire, like I do, now it is entirely in my interest to invest any profits I have into mitigation. Mm-hmm. And so like one of the things with us as an insurance company is we make all of our insights, one of the things we make all of our insights available for free to anyone that's working in mitigation, whether that's government, whether that's folks doing controlled burns and forest thinning. We say, hey, we'll tell you everything we know. Because if you can go out there and use that to do a better job doing defensible space, do a better job forest thinning, then great. That reduces our risk, right? And who knows long term, like maybe we get growing big enough, like the old Berkshire Hathaway flywheel, right? Like we can start taking that. So those profits.
Let's describe what Kettle does here. You're trying to use big data to predict where these fires are going to be and then do better insurance for individuals, for the state, for who?
So we operate at the reinsurance level.
Explain what that is to people who don't know.
Happily. Reinsurance is insurance for insurance companies. And so before your eyes all glaze over, what that essentially means, right, is like it's insurance companies cover anything that could go wrong with your house. Say you have home insurance, your roof leaks, you get robbed. They pay all these things. What they aren't set up financially to manage and what they go buy insurance for are when a fire comes through and wipes out 500 homes at once. They buy an insurance policy the same way that you have an insurance policy. You're like, okay, I fix I'll call an electrician when there's a small thing and over here, but then when it's a big thing, I'm going to call my insurance company. They do the same thing. And so what reinsurance is really the business of insuring against catastrophes, which are being exacerbated by climate change. There's been a 3x increase in billion-dollar events in the last decade in America.
So if I were to reflect that back to you, the correct way to think about this is I'm an insurance company. I've done my job. I've got everybody to buy their insurance.
Right.
Now I'm looking at it going, holy cow. This group of people, the subset of people I sold it to, are in a high risk zone. If some, once in 100-year flood comes or once in 100-year fire comes, I'm insolvent.
Right.
I have not done my actuary tables, or I don't know what you would call that act in insurance of predicting for the worst case scenario. But said another way, these insurance companies are not designed to withstand the worst case scenario, are they?
That's right. And they're not designed that's the plan, right? And so the regulators say, hey, you need to offload this tail risk or sell or buy reinsurance essentially for that 1 in 100-year event. And then they go to the reinsurance world and do just that.
As you've studied this, what data sources seem to be the best predictors of where these fires will happen next? Because my understanding is of these 10,000 fires that occur, some number of them are dipshits starting fires, at a campground or doing something really stupid. In other words, arson or accidental fires. I don't know what percentage that equals, but it does seem like we keep getting stories of like, hey, by the way, that fire was caused by this person.
Yeah.
So tell us if that is actually true, or it's just it's so memorable when it does happen that we overestimate it. And then how on earth could you predict something that's occurring by an accidental person creating a fire, or at worst, an arsonist doing this for some deranged sociopathic reason?
Yeah. So we run 2 models. One is the ignition model, trying to predict where fires will start. And then the second is a spread model, trying to understand how fires spread. And the two most important data sources into that are geospatial data, essentially satellite imagery. And what's incredible over the last 30 years, right, is we now have 30 years of incredible satellite data from NASA and then increasingly from private companies putting it up. It's a cool time to be alive. And then the second is weather data. So same thing. NOAA has been collecting weather data for years, making it available. And those two things can give you a lot. And then we're writing machine learning models, right, that are looking at what's happening, right? So you're exactly right. Like there are all these different factors that are, when they align in the wrong direction, they become one of those 14 fires, right? And so if you think about it, it's what we've talked about, right? Okay. Well, first off, a lot of fires start right along a road, right? And you look at the satellite imagery is looking at this gray pixelated straight line and it doesn't know, but the model's like, oh, fires consistently start next to these things. Why? Because there's electricity lines there, people throw trash out of the windows, cigarettes, etc. Now, most of the time that fire goes out because it's pretty, good chance the fire station can get to it. But if you have something happen and you have the winds blowing at 98 miles an hour, to the east, and then you have many miles of dried out trees with no access to them, suddenly the model's going, wow, this looks exactly like all those other fires those 14 fires last year that turned into really bad events, versus one that happens and it's right next to a Walmart parking lot. And they go, oh, that fire started, but then it went out pretty quickly because it ran into this big fire break, is how the model's like looking at it, right? And so satellite imagery and weather data is really the main two that make a tremendous difference.
Now, 6 of 7 of the top largest wildfires ever measured in California were in the last 13 months. So it is getting much worse. And I think saying much worse or dramatically worse would probably be an understatement of what we've just witnessed in California. Is it going to get much worse and dramatically worse than this already dramatically worst year based on the information that you've learned from satellites, et cetera? In other words, should we be terrified right now? Because it felt terrifying the last 2 years here as a Bay Area resident. I'm nowhere near the fire zone. But watching 3 weeks of not being able to leave your house during a pandemic because the air turned orange in the Bay Area just made me and many other people think we need to have an escape plan, not for fire in the Bay Area. Thankfully, it's harder for the fire to get here because it's so developed. But we need to have an escape plan to get out of the smoke.
Yeah.
Is it going to get dramatically worse? And how bad was this year? Am I overreacting?
Okay, these are the right questions. So, as I mentioned earlier, 14 million structures in this. Last year was third worst year in history. Actually, in recent history, like one of the worst from acres burned. We said 4%, right? 4 million. But actually only 11,460 structures burned down. And that's really, that's terrible. Like that's 11,000 families and businesses that lost. Yeah. But again, out of 14 million. So while it feels like the whole state is burning down, actually less than 0.1% is actually burning down a year, right?
Of structures. If we look at structures. So this is why statistics and metrics and having a thoughtful conversation on this is important. So while 6 of the 7 largest fires ever measured were the last 13 months, the Camp Fire was much more destructive. That one, that 2018 one in Napa area.
That's right.
We lost
exactly.
Did we lose 20,000 in that one?
It was 20,000 in those two, in that year, and 20,000 the year before, actually, as well. So those were the two worst from structures, even though half as many acres burned down that year.
Right. It just got an area where people were living.
Yes.
Should people be allowed, in your estimation, as somebody who has skin in the game in a massive way, should people be allowed to build or rebuild homes, I should say, in places where we've had dramatic fire activity? Yes or no?
It should be highly discouraged.
Okay. How do you practically get people who are unable to build homes because of the NIMBY red tape of California to not take the opportunity to rebuild a home where they're legally allowed to rebuild it, and there are no homes available. We're in a massive housing crisis. You have to think that if we weren't in such a housing crisis and didn't live in such a goddamn NIMBY state, that people would not feel the need to rebuild in these zones because they would be allowed to build in other places. Does the NIMBYism and red tape of the state exacerbate the problem?
People should be able to build in places where there are good jobs and low risk of climate change.
Got it.
That would be a good thing.
Yeah. So you're being diplomatic. The fact is, we're not allowed to build in the places that are safe. And if your home burned down in the campfire fire, because you had that as a previous lot, my understanding, I could be wrong, somebody will fact check me if I am, producers hopefully, you could just rebuild on that. Because it was your home and you have insurance and you're entitled to that lot. So it is a lot easier to rebuild in the fire zone than it is to rebuild in a non-fire zone in California.
That's true. And one of the things that's happening, I will say one of the things that does happen because it's financial is that you do have a system where people are losing their home insurance. So a lot of those folks might be able to rebuild, but this has changed in the last couple of years. They might not be able to get insurance for that home anymore. And that honestly is maybe a good thing if it's in a really high risk area, right?
Thing. Yeah.
It depends exactly. Once a place is burned, it also means it's not going to burn for a little while, but things grow back. We won't get into, but eucalyptus, for instance, is not natural to the state. It grows extremely fast and it explodes, right? Whereas redwoods, they store moisture and actually are made to withstand fires. So there's just that's a long-term solution. But, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd put a lot of redwoods back and get rid of those eucalyptus. But what's happening, right? So those people can't rebuild. They can't get insurance maybe. So maybe they decide not to rebuild there. Maybe they can and they do. But there's such panic in the insurance world that now a lot of people can't get their home insurance who actually aren't in that risky of an area. Like I'm in the Bay Area, right? I'm up in the hills in the East Bay. And I lost my insurance. I got dropped this year because of wildfire, Wow. Great irony, right? And
so what does that mean practically for you? You basically are responsible if that house burns down.
I was able to get additional insurance. I obviously know some people, but in that interim, yeah. Wow. Actually, what I would have had to do is I would have had to go to the FAIR plan, which is the government sponsored high catastrophe plan. And they're required to provide insurance, but it's not a good policy, right? It's like you get health insurance when you already have cancer.
Got it. So it pays very little, and it costs a lot. It's
capped at it pays little. It costs a lot. It's not an ideal structure, but they're basically saying you're not insurable here. The thing that's happening, right, as I talked about earlier, that 0.1% of the state actually burns down is that tons of people are getting kicked onto the FAIR plan who really aren't in that risky of an area. And there are some people who absolutely should be, and we should not be building there because they're in super high risk areas, right? Like for us, our underwriting is we don't insure in the top 25% of areas. But what's happened is there's been such panic in the insurance markets that the reinsurers have pulled out, right? And it's very similar to post 2008, right? You had all these people go, I'm not going to write loans anymore. No way. And then the tech world realized, and they came in and they said, that there's actually a lot of I'm happy to write a student loan to someone that graduates from Harvard or MIT. That seems like a good bet. And then you have companies like SoFi be able to move into this space when everyone sort of panicked and moved back. And that's essentially where we are today, where you say the supply has dried up. Everyone's like, the supply of reinsurance, I'm not going to insure, which means the price has spiked. And what we come in and do, and we say, hey, we're going to apply a much more analytical machine learning based model to this and be able to bring some stability back to the market, and be able to hopefully, be able to help people get their insurance, shore up the the real estate market of California.
Are the insurance companies for fire insurance specifically looking at the foliage around a house today and saying, listen, you have Italian cypresses, those things are matchsticks, and you put them like a row of matchsticks around your house because you love Tuscany?
Yeah.
Because like I was in Tuscany and I was looking at them, and my friend said, yeah, you can't have those in Italy. You can't have those Italian cypress in Los Angeles anymore, or some places. Can't get insurance at your house. If you have them, you got to cut them down. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what somebody told me.
It is true. Yeah. There are two things I would say about this to be a little nuanced. One is totally true. And yes, there are a lot of services and underwriters now who are looking at that. They're like, hey, you have these Italian cypresses, you have trees that are hanging right over your roof. This is no longer insurable. And it's called defensible space or home hardening, this kind of stuff. And that is important work. At the same time, it's looking at it from a really micro point of view. And the truth is, if you are in the parameter of one of those 14 fires inside, it does not make a difference whether or not you have Italian cypresses or not, right? Whether you have a tree that's 5 feet from your house or 15 feet from your house. What really matters there is that big picture, macro level weather and geospatial data. In the 10 miles per edge of the perimeter of the fire where these embers are being thrown, it makes a huge difference because that ember hits your house and hits that Italian cypress. Bad news. The house next door might have done through the smart work of closing up their vents, not putting Italian cypress in, and that one's not going to burn down. It's going to have enough time for the fire.
What does the closing of the vents do? I've heard that before.
It's so that embers don't get inside your house and burn up, all those old Amazon boxes that you have stored in your basement, basically.
So something as simple as that can change the fate of one of these fires and structures. I had this idea that we could take the blankets that people use to put out car fires or things and throw them over a house. I found out that during this wildfire, somebody actually wrapped their home in a fire blanket, and it worked. And they wrapped the biggest redwood tree in the Bay Area, got wrapped with a fire retardant blanket. Where are we at with, because I've been looking for a startup to fund based on that idea. Have you seen anybody come up with a bulletproof solution for, a home not getting put on fire, and how, for $10,000 per home, couldn't we just put blankets around them or have a blanket system that dropped over them? Or there are all these gels and stuff that people use to put out fires or protect stuff. Why don't we require or incentivize putting a tank on the top of these homes with the gel? When it hits a certain fire temperature, instead of just putting on water, which obviously gets cut because they're using it to cut fires and they have to fly it in with helicopters and planes because there's so little water pressure, you could just drop that goo over the home and keep it from going on fire. Why are those things not being deployed? Or are they?
There's a lot of insight and research going into this. Another one to add to you is that I saw a startup doing is that dry ice actually just sucks up fire. Like it's amazing. And so someone's trying to figure out, how do I deploy these in drones? And,
will you introduce me to them? Don't say their name on the program. I don't want anybody to front run that. Will you introduce me to them?
Yeah, we'll make that connection.
It's
cool.
So the idea would be if you put the dry ice around a building where you had some sort of dry ice system where you made a wall of dry ice, like the white wall, like the ice wall in Game of Thrones could stop the red walkers, in this case, the fire.
Exactly.
Wow, that is fascinating.
Possible. Yeah, there's some cool stuff going on there. And it's incredibly important. To your point about the other ones, yes, there are a lot of good mitigation things that could be done from a household perspective. The blanket one, I love that. The wrapping the house and things like that. And that's what you can kind of do as an individual, right? And then I just want to clarify at the same time, that forest thinning and controlled burn at a statewide level would make a tremendous difference. And really, because the other thing with that is not only does it say, okay, now there's going to be less fires and there'll be less dramatic fires, but as we talked about earlier, it actually reduces the smoke, right? And so as we're saying, it's actually the risk of the fire hitting your house is still, only less than 0.1% a year burned down. However, as a Californian, that smoke is awful. And
we had 200, I don't know where it was by you, but we had 200, 300 particle days on the peninsula pretty regularly.
Yep.
And I was just like, this is, and then you look at poor Tahoe, this incredible jewel of California, even the jewel of the United States.
Yep.
And, the fire is going to hit there eventually, right? I mean, it's just an inevitability in your mind.
It's a
high probability. You're doing the metrics. I mean, tell it to us straight. Chances Tahoe gets hit by one of these fires in the next decade. Certain? 50%?
So two answers to this. So it is a high risk area for sure. It is a very high risk area. At the same time, what we saw this last year, right, is that, and you see this in Napa and Sonoma as well, the fires get very close. And what happens is, as I said, firefighters are incredible and we are getting pretty good at this. And so we put up just like that final wall, like you were talking about the wall of ice, like we're putting it in and we're not going to let South Lake Tahoe get hit. Or you look at the fires in Napa and Sonoma, right? Like they have gotten right next to the 29, like they're just come right to the edge and they're taking out wine. But like the homes, we managed to stop them just in time. Wow. So it's hard to say. The answer is we're going to have to fight fires all the time in Tahoe and in wine country and in South California too, until we can get these bigger fires under control, like I talked about. But people are pretty resourceful and incredible, and they're doing a great job of stopping it before it really hits those major towns. But then you have other examples, right? You have Paradise where it doesn't, right? And every once in a while it comes straight through, or that big
and that
corner
has to do
of
with
Santa
the winds,
Rosa.
Right? That's our
hard.
Wind issue.
That's a wind issue.
No, it doesn't matter the bravery or the quantity of these firefighters. Yeah. If that wind is up, they can't stop the wind. Nobody.
It's so hard.
Yeah. So here, just as we wrap up here, and thank you for doing the work you're doing and being such a great guest and explaining all this. There is fire roads very naturally stop these fires. We're correct in that, yes? And that's why they're created, and they're highly, highly, highly effective, is my understanding. And they tend to be 1 or 2 lanes wide, and that's enough for them to be effective. Am I correct there?
Makes a big difference. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, like if it's 90-mile-an-hour Santa Ana winds and the fire's kind of gone, it's like it's not going to make a difference. But these are some of the main reasons why, the vast majority of those 10,000 fires do get put out before they cause major damage.
So I wonder if we haven't wanted to create more roads through our forest land because we don't want animals to be run over by trucks, and we don't want to spoil it. That being said, you're going to have a lot of animals dying in these fires, and a lot less would die if we had more fire roads built and more access roads built. So should we not go on a major project? Because I saw people in Napa doing this during the last couple of years. People were just taking their own bulldozers and just driving straight through the forest and just knocking down everything in sight and creating their own fire roads. They were not asking permission. They were just, they went rogue. If we created, our Appalachian Trail, as it were, or other, type of roads, we could create this incredible hiking trail, biking trail that could be used by everybody. Don't put trucks on it. Just let it be used by humans to travel over a lot of these mountains that are otherwise inaccessible. It would be a win-win, and you could, charge for use of them or make them in some way like a national park. People want to go take their mountain biking or camp along them. It could be extraordinary, like we did with the High Line in New York. So, do you think there's this opportunity to make the greatest bike path / fire road in the world? Because the fire roads in California people use for hiking Southern California all the time. The Santa Monica Mountains are filled with them.
Yeah.
And people hike them.
There are lots of them throughout Northern California too. Like they're extremely useful and important. And the long and short is, yes, we should have more anywhere where there's danger. Right? They're throughout, the hills in the East Bay of the Bay Area, right? And for a good reason, because they're trying to block anything that might go wrong in all of that protected land that's on the other edge of that hill.
Why don't we have more of them? Is it just the expense of it, or are there people fighting it because they think it's not good for, whatever plants?
I haven't seen people fighting it hard.
Yeah.
Actually in my community in the hills that we actually expanded ours, the neighborhood just kind of organized and does the work. And so there's more and more happening. And fire chiefs are really leading, like, we're going to put a break here, we're going to put a break there. I think honestly, a lot of this is to remind us, like, pre-2016, it was a different world, right? We did not have this as much. And now it's changed over the last 5 years. And so we're playing a little bit of catch up.
Yeah. And there's no way this is a fluke. I mean, I think that's one of the things we're going to have to just
this is the new reality.
This is a reality. It's not stopping. It's going to get worse in all likelihood.
I mean, as I said earlier, we got to put a lot of money to work, at doing forest management, forest thinning, and things. I wish there was a way to reduce the temperature and do those things, but it's not going to happen. And so what we need to do is reduce the fuel load. And that just takes a lot of concerted effort and work, and then protect people and incentivize them not to build in places that are high risk. And that's the new reality.
And you've raised money for your company. You didn't get into YC, but you did raise money and you've been growing this business. I'm assuming you're hiring if somebody wanted to work on this, like, really incredible project.
We are. Yeah. We're hiring, always looking for great machine learning engineers, with great earth science backgrounds, infrastructure engineers.
Where can people find out more and track your progress over time?
Yeah, our website is Kettle, KETTLE.com. Same handle on Twitter.
Is that because the kettle is boiling now and we have to keep an eye on it?
That's right. Yeah, that's one of the reasons. The other one was there's an old saying, like, we're all in this kettle of fish together. And it was like, this is one of the things I love about insurance is, like, it's this system that allows humans to cooperate at this giant scale, right? Like, what we're doing when you pay your premiums, even if it's terrible, is you're actually putting your money together and saying, hey, Cal, if you get hit by that, fire this year, I got your back. I'll throw you a buck.
Beautiful.
And we'll do it. It's beautiful. It's totally beautiful. And it's like, we can make this thing work better. And the reality is the models that are being used have been not really updated. Like, this industry was the OG data scientists, like, invented data science. The industry 500 years ago of actuarial tables. It hasn't had an update. And, we can now land spacecraft and have cars drive themselves. This original data science should get an update.
Absolutely. Are drones playing a role yet in the data that you're using, or low planes?
Imagery capture. Yeah.
And then,
we're not doing it ourselves, but we
about those. Oh, you use third-party services?
Yeah.
I think there's also the blimps and stuff like that, like Project Moon and some of those, like, balloons that are able to get, like, really good data. So, I mean, it's really interesting. We have all these data sources that are looking for people to build machine learning and computer visualization on top of them. And you're an example of one of them. So it's super cool. All right. Thanks for coming on the pod, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.